In the name of Almighty Allah, the most merciful. Yes, Ms. Asma, could you please share with us the content material relating to differences between private and public company? Yes, Ms. Asma Arif, please.
Yes, sir. Minimum members in private company. At least 2 members are required to form a private company. It's required 1 members. Instead, in the public company, at least 3 members are required to form a public company.
That's right. This is the minimum requirement. By the way, the companies change their category or nomenclature even on the basis of number of members they have. And there is a minimum strength given and there is a maximum ceiling given. In private company, if the number of members exceeds from 50, then that company gets into the category of public company from private company. Vis-a-vis, the minimum number of members also result into the change of category. If it has minimum 2 members, it can still continue as a private company. But let's say that the number of members reduces from 2 to 1, then the change will take place. And from private company, the company will become a single member company and so on. So this is the minimum requirement. Ms. Fatima Sultan.
I'm sorry, sir.
Yes,
sir, I have a question.
Yes, Ms. Yusra, please.
If you said if the requirement for the members change for either of the companies, like private or public company, the nature of the business would also change. For instance, if the limit for the maximum and minimum number for private companies changed to now what the limitation for the public company is it possible that only this factor would change or they would still continue to operate as private company?
You see, there are certain factors. This is very important question, Ms. Yusra, you raised. Basically, the change can take place on the basis of lots of factors. We need to bear in mind that attaining the status of a special category or specific category, a company is required to fulfill certain criteria. If you want to have a private company, you're required to have at least 2 members. If you want to have a private company, you're required to have a certain amount of paid up capital and so on and so forth. But as a matter of fact, this is your articles of association and memorandum of association, which actually determine the category of company you hold. If I have satisfied you, or if there is any aspect of your question missing, please pose that again.
Sure. So all we have to do is satisfy the minimum requirement for a company, and it can, like for instance, my company is private company, and I've satisfied all the requirements, the minimum requirements for every aspect. But if that exceeds and fall in under the category of any feature of public company, would my company be still considered as private company, or that would fall under the umbrella of public company? That was my question.
Well, you see, then that will be a public company, and we will say that it is converted by default. Under section 56 of Companies Act, we will say that now this conversion, it is automatically converted. You did not make an application, you did not did it by choice. It is in fact converted by default. So this is conversion by default from private company's status into a public company. Any other question?
Thank you.
You're most welcome. Now, Ms. Yusra, please share the second point with
maximum member. The maximum limit of member is 50, and there is no limit on the maximum number of members.
That's right. You see, earlier on, when we were discussing the conversion, from private company into a public company said that if the number of maximum number of members are exceeded the limit of 50, then by default company will become a public company. Now, the number of members in public company, there is no limitation, and there can be 100,000 members in a public company. So sometimes people convert their status because they want to assume the different character. If they are a private company, since there are certain limitations, so in order to abridge those limitations, they opt to change their status. And this is how they can, make themselves capable of, dealing with the changed scenario. Now, the next point is scale of shares. Ms. Fatima Sultan, can you share this point with the
Yes, sir. Scale of shares. Private company, it cannot invite general public for purchase of shares. For the public company, it can invite the general public for purchase of shares.
Absolutely right. So purchase of shares, we commonly known the word to subscribe its shares. So the subscription can be invited for the public company, but in case of a private company, there is no, you cannot subscribe your share, you cannot issue a prospectus, you cannot go for initial public offering, you cannot hold your IPO because you are a private company. But if you're interested to do that, you want to have a free transfer of shares, you want to exceed the number of members and so on, then from private company, you're required to change your status as a. Now, the next point is commencement of business. Mr. Harris, can you please do the reading commencement of business?
Commencement of the business. It can start its business when it gets the certificate of incorporation. It can start its business after fulfilling conditions regarding minimum subscription and qualification shares.
Absolutely right. So commencement of business can only take place once company is duly incorporated, and to that effect, a certificate of incorporation is issued by the regulator, by the concerned authority, and that is in case of a private limited company. But in case of a public company, it can commence its business once it has fulfilled the preconditions, and those are minimum subscription and qualification shares. I have described the qualification share at the end, and we will discuss that later. Statutory meeting is the next point. Let's have another member, Ms. Mahnoor. Ms. Mahnoor, can you please share the next point, that is statutory meeting?
Statutory meeting company. It is not required to host statutory meeting and to file statutory report with the registrar. Statutory meeting in a public company. It is required to host statutory meeting and submit a statutory.
That's right. You see, statutory meeting, statutory provided in law, in the Companies Act 2017 and Corporate Governance Regulations 2019. So it is provided that there are at least certain number of meetings has to be held in order to fulfill the legal requirement or the statutory requirement. This is in fact a mandatory requirement in terms of a public company, but in terms of a private company, this requirement is not there. Now, issue of prospectus is next point. It cannot issue prospectus or statement in lieu of prospectus. So they cannot invite public to subscribe its private company. But on the other hand, the public company, it must issue prospectus, because without the issuance of prospectus, they cannot invite public to subscribe its shares, to subscribe its shares. Ms. Tania, can you please share the next point with us? That is framing of articles.
Framing of articles. It has to frame its own articles, and for the public company, it may decide not to frame its own articles and adopt Table A.
That's right. So Table A is a template provided, and the public company can simply adopt Table A, the template, and it needs not to frame its own articles or the articles to cater its specific needs. Now, transfer of shares is the next point. Yes, please, Ms. Tania, please continue.
Transfer of shares. There is restriction on transfer of shares. And for the public company, there is no restriction on the transfer of shares.
Absolutely right. So this restriction is imposed on private company, that private company cannot freely transfer its shares, but this restriction is not there as far as public company is concerned. Now, the next point is number of directors. That is the next point. You see, earlier on, we have discussed the minimum number of members. Here we are discussing the minimum number of directors or the number of directors required for fulfilling the basic criterion that is for a private company and that is for public company. Ms. Asma, can you please share this point with the party?
Of directors. A single member company must have one director, with a private company must have at least two directors. Well, in public company, a listed company must have at least 7 directors, while a non-listed company must have at least 3 directors.
That is right. You see, listed companies are those, as you know, that their shares are available to the public at large. These are listed in Pakistan Stock Exchange. You can buy their shares, you can sell their shares, you can open an account with the CDC, that is Central Depository Company, that is a subsidiary company of Government of Pakistan. And you can open your account in CDC, and you can have a brokerage account also. And through that brokerage account, you can have a terminal available. And with the help of that terminal, you can buy shares, you can sell shares. And that is, in fact, for a listed company. So since listed companies invite public to invest, these are normally large companies. These are the companies having large scale business. At times they have national character, they have international character also. They're involved in imports and exports. And like our textile sector in Pakistan, as you know, our textile industry is an export industry primarily. So these industries, since they are having a larger responsibilities to perform, this is why at least 7 directors are required for large scale listed companies. On the other hand, if there is a public company, but that is not a large scale company, that is not listed in Pakistan Stock Exchange, then the number of directors are only 3, which is a basic requirement. And moreover, in corporate governance regulations, we will study at a later stage that even female director is a requirement. Even there is a certain qualifications given for the directors to be fulfilled. And we will discuss those points at a later stage. Now, filing of return is the next point. Ms. Asma, can you please share this with the participants?
Yes, sir. Filing of return. In private company, it is not required to file annual return with the registrar if its paid up capital is less than 1 million rupees. Well, in public company, it is required to file annual return with the registrar.
Very right. So that is, there is no restriction as far as paid up capital is concerned. Whatever is the paid up capital for a public company, that is duty bound to file a return every year in order to infuse this information for the general public that this is the status of our public company, and their annual returns actually will provide information to the general public that will create a transparent environment where public interested investors or the shareholders, they will have the first-hand information regarding the financial status of the company, regarding the borrowing of that company, regarding the future prospects of the company. So this is why this is a legal requirement that annual returns are required to be filed. Now, next is word limited. Yes, Ms. Tania, can you please share this point?
Yes, sir. Word limited. It must use the word private limited at the end of its name. For the public limited, it must use the word limited at the end of its name.
That's right. So that public, while reading the name of a certain company, will just get to know that what is the status of the company. Signatories memorandum to form private company, 2 signatories to memorandum are required. To form public company, 3 or more signatories to memorandum are required. Patient share is the next point. Mr. Fakhr, if your reception is well, please share this point with us.
Is it better now, sir?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
The directors are not required to purchase qualification shares, whereas in the case of qualification share.
That is right. So qualification share, in order to be qualified to become a director, that is required to buy shares in public company. But this requirement is not to be met in private company. Mr. Yasser, Mr. Haris Javed, can you please share the next point, interested director?
Interested directors, a director having interest in any contract can vote in board meetings. In public limited company, a director having interest in any contract cannot vote in board meeting.
That is right. You see, public companies, as you know, if they are listed, then of course, public at large, they have invested in those companies and they have their stakes involved. Their, the Pakistan Stock Exchange and our Securities and Exchange Commission of Pakistan, if you browse their website, you will find that there is a specific word used, that is Jama Punji. That is Urdu word, in vernacular it is used, and that is that the regulator understands that public at large, they invest in listed companies, their hard-earned money, they invest their savings in those companies. So in order to safeguard their legitimate interests, this is required, that there should not be any conflict of interest. If there is a public company, whether it is listed or it is not listed, their directors should not be allowed to involve in a malpractice. They should not be allowed to be interested in a contract, and they are allowed to make a decision in the meeting, because then the working of the board of directors will not be transparent. Let's have this example. There are 7 directors in a company, and that is a listed company. One of the director have his own business. He is on a board of director of a company. He's on a, let me quote an example. We have Punjab Provincial Cooperative Bank. It's a provincial bank, deals with agriculture sector. Now, if one of the director has his fertilizer setup, he has his fertilizer factory, and the agenda of the board is that today board is going to decide that Punjab Provincial Cooperative Bank is going to enter into an agreement with a fertilizer company to provide fertilizer to the agriculture sector on a reserved price. Now, in order to make this decision, if a director who has his own fertilizer setup, you will allow him to participate in the meeting, what are you going to do? Actually, or what may happen, he will use his clout, influence to make a decision in his favor. And resultantly, maybe his company has a higher bid. You will still opt buying, or the procurement from that fertilizer company, wherein one of the directors is interested. So in order to avoid conflict of interest, the member who is an interested member in a certain contract is not allowed to participate in the meeting. So a director having interest in any contract cannot vote in a board meeting. He cannot use his vote. He cannot use his strength to compel the board of directors to reach to a decision which may not ultimately serve the legitimate purpose of board of directors. I'll take the questions at the end. Let's have the audit point. Let me request Mr. Fakhr to share this audit point with
Company not being a subsidiary of a public company or private company having paid up capital less than 3 million rupees is not required to company is required to appoint a chartered accountant as an auditor.
Basically, the appointment of chartered accountant is to ensure that the audit of the company is up to the mark, is transparent, it is to reflect and depict the exact financial well-being of the company. So in order to ensure that, the public companies are required to have their auditors, and they are required to appoint chartered accountants for this purpose, for audit purposes. For private company, if it is having the paid up capital and that is less than 3 million rupees, then that company is not required to engage chartered accountants for the audit of their company. Qualification share definition, we discussed that, and I have just reproduced here the definition, qualification share, and that is defined. Mr. Fakhr, can you read for the participants, please?
Yes, sir. The qualifications shares are that number of shares which directors of the company must hold if the articles of company so provide. To become the directors of said.
Right. So if the articles of association provided that the company, if you want to become a member of board of directors, you need to have certain number of shares that provide you a qualification, that provides you the status of a director. So that is qualification shares, which is a mandatory requirement in order to become member of board of directors.
Now, isn't it a mandatory requirement only for the public company? Because the private company, the directors are not supposed to purchase qualification shares, right?
That is right. You see, as you know that in as far as private companies are concerned, private companies are normally private companies are normally companies, family-based companies. Normally, let's say that there is there is a sole proprietorship. A has established a business. That business has grown to the extent that now the family has decided, or the friends have decided, that let's have a private company instead of having a partnership, because partnership, again, there are certain restrictions on partnership. And as far as limited companies are concerned, or companies duly incorporated under Companies Act 2017, are the companies which are basically having a mandate to enter into a large scale business, having a mandate, legal mandate to perform certain acts which partnerships cannot perform. So normally people step up from a sole proprietorship to a partnership, and from partnership to a private limited company. So this is why, as far as qualification shares are concerned, the directors are not required to purchase qualification shares, because in many cases, the directors are the owners of the company. So there is no requirement that over and above their ownership, they will go and buy the qualification shares. But as you rightly said, that here in case of a public company, the directors are required to purchase qualification share. Mr. Fakhr, I hope this point is clear.
Yes, sir, it is. Thank you.
Brilliant. Any other question, please?
Sir, I have a question.
Yes, Ms. Yusra Javed.
Sir, I wanted to ask, so it's all again about the conversion of a company. So if a public company is acquiring a private company, would that be considered a public company as well again, even though it is just like it has fulfilled fulfilled all the requirements of a private company, but now a public company is going to acquire it. What would be the nature of the business then?
Well, as a matter of fact, now let me rephrase your question. Your question is that there is a private company and the private company is acquired by a public company. Then,
Yes,
of
sir.
course, that company cannot retain its status as a private company. Now that company will be a holding company of a bigger company, or we will say that that is an ancillary company. So we will study that if it is a holding company as a subsidiary company, a smaller company has a holding company, and in Pakistan we have a number of businesses. If we talk about MCB Bank, for instance, if we talk about certain textile based companies, or if we talk about some real estate sector companies, these are the subsidiary companies of a larger company, which is called a holding company actually. So a private company acquired by a public company, for instance, will lose the status, will not be able to retain the status of a private company, because this cannot go hand in hand. Then that has to change its status as a subsidiary company of a bigger company. And this is how that larger company will be a holding company of this small company, which was earlier a private company, but now act as a subsidiary company.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
You're most welcome. Before I conclude this topic, if there is any other question, please.
No, sir.
Okay, brilliant. So let's conclude, and I highly appreciate your active participation. Thank you very much.